Hello, Dark Reader, and welcome to the Dark Side of the Library podcast. I'm your host, Katie. Today, we're going to be talking about, on this minisode, A House with Good Bones. This is by T. Kingfisher. Now, you're probably here because you want to hear about my thoughts on the book. So, up front, I am going to say I give this book about, let's say, a 3.5 out of 5 stars. And we'll get into that a little bit later because I want to talk about who T. Kingfisher is and a bit of the summary of the book. Maybe you are familiar with T. Kingfisher, or also known as Ursula Vernon, but you were like, oh, I didn't even know she had a new adult read coming out. Now I will tell you about it. Or maybe you're just looking for your next dark read, and I am going to say that Ursula Vernon usually has some solid, fun sci-fi dark fantasy, a lot of urban fantasy that's pretty great. So let's talk about the summary of the book. A House with Good Bones. We have our protagonist whose name is Sam Montgomery, and she is what you would call an archaeoentomologist, and I had no idea that was the thing, which is wild because I did take many archaeology and anthropology classes. I just, bugs were never on my radar, but it makes sense. Like, it totally makes sense. So she typically goes on these digs and she studies she loves bugs. So one of her jokes, Sam's jokes, is that people always say, oh, are you like that person in Jurassic Park with the mosquito and the amber? And she's like, oh God, I hear it all the time. Anyway, so that's her. She's had this really long dig, and finally she gets this extended break. Her brother calls her and says, Mom's a little off. So Sam lives in Tucson, Arizona. She has to drive all the way to North Carolina to go visit her mother, Edith. And so she's kind of like, anticipating things being really, kind of off, maybe she's sick or lonely or something, but she lets that go. She's really excited. She's like, okay, Mom and I are going to wrap up on the couch. We're going to drink some wine, watch our murder mystery shows like we always did, and we're just going to have a good time. So Sam actually gets really excited for this visit. When she approaches the house and she walks in, there's a few very notable things that really bother her. So the house used to be more colorful and lively, and the walls are they're sterile. They're just white and kind of, that really medicinal look that people are either love it or they're just like, ugh. Another thing too is that there used to be this comfortable clutter. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about. I have a comfortably cluttered house myself. So if it was entirely clean, it would be a little weird. I think people would be like, that's strange. So that's kind of how her house has looked, which is very different than what Edith was like. At least when Sam left originally to go off and be on her own. Not only that, but when she sees her mom, something about the Montgomery family, especially the Montgomery ladies, they come in two forms. You're either proudly bigger, stockier, chonkier, great, or you're very thin, kind of frail. And Edith used to look a lot more like Sam. So Sam is very proud of her body, but she's a bigger girl. And Edith used to be too. And it's like she lost 180 pounds or whatever. And it's really weird in a short period of time, like months. And it's worrisome because she looks frail, pale, sickly. She just doesn't look healthy at all. So these are all things that are red flags to Sam as she approaches her mom's house. Not only that, there's more. Edith used to be really quirky, outgoing, bubbly. She's a very, very kind and generous person, but she's got a sailor's mouth, that kind of thing. And now all of the sudden she seems really anxious, more soft-spoken, on edge. She does not swear anymore. So a lot more red flags. Now, Sam is there's a lot to register there. She goes out to the garden. This was her her grandmother's garden that she took care of like a baby. It is magazine worthy. So she goes out there and she realizes there's this jar of teeth that's kind of hiding amongst these rose bushes. And she grabs it and she notices that there's this, swirling thing of vultures above the garden. So that is kind of the summary of the book. Is Sam is trying to dig into what is happening to her mom. Something's clearly off. There's a lot of weird stuff going on in the house itself. And by the way, the house was actually her grandmother's house. So everything has kind of changed from being Edith's house and actually has changed more to be like what her grandma used to be like. So that is kind of our summary of the book. Now let's talk about Ursula Vernon, if you've never heard of her before, or actually T. Kingfisher. So T. Kingfisher is her pen name. She uses it because she is a prolific and amazing children's author, and so Ursula Vernon is the name she uses for all of her more younger, middle-aged reading novels, and then T. Kingfisher for her adult fiction. This is so that, if you are a kid and you were like, oh, I'm so excited to see the new Ursula Vernon book, it's not, adult fiction and blood and gore, whatever, she's being safe. I appreciate it. I have read a lot of T. Kingfisher books within the past year. So I read like Nettle and Bone, What Moves the Dead, and I really love her writing style. And for me, this one, A House with Good Bones, was not as great as some of the other ones I have read. It's still very good, don't get me wrong, but I wouldn't say it is the best I've read. And again, she is a very prolific author. We can't have it all, so I get it. Now let me just tell you how I feel about this book on this minisode. That's why you're here. First of all, 3.5 out of 5 stars for me. I think it's a pretty solid read, and I actually think it's really fun for spring and summertime. It definitely has less fall vibes because we are dealing more with like nature here. There's a lot of because Sam is mostly an entomologist and she loves bugs. We get a lot of, and bugs are coming out of their hibernation period. We're going to see more bugs. We can actually relate to Sam a little bit more right now while we're reading. There's gardens. In fact, we have Edith, who has a gardener named Phil, who comes and takes care of her or whatever, and it's kind of a romantic interest, like very light. Romance is not the forefront of this novel at all. It's just suggested. So, lots of springtime themes. So I suggest reading it around now, springtime. It's actually very fun for this time of year. Another thing I really enjoy about Ursula Vernon / T. Kingfisher is she gets right into it. When you read her story, there's no like, oh, so we have our main character Sam, and Sam grew up being this way. There's no giant long introduction for each character, no crazy buildup. It's like she goes and visits her mom. We're already there in the house. But even though she's immediately immersed in the house and we're already there with the main plot, the burn is very slow. So it's not a crazy fast-paced novel. It is definitely a slow burn, even though we are placed directly into the plot line. So I oftentimes will listen to the audiobook, and I did enjoy most of the audiobook, who was narrated by Alyssa Brown. So I did have a few issues, though, that were a little glaring, and it was every time that Phil was narrated. Granted, I can't imagine how difficult it would be to be a voice actor with a whole range of different voices to do. But Phil had a very I don't know, he sounded like he like a chronic smoker, or just like kind of choking on air a little bit, or it was really hard to breathe and really nasally. And I just felt like the voice just wasn't deep enough. I personally thought it was pretty distracting. The other voices in the book, the audiobook, were narrated beautifully. We have Gail, Sam, and Edith. They all had, and Grandma May as well, all having different voices attached to them. And at times, especially when Gail versus Sam were talking, I was like, oh my goodness, is this 2 voice actors? No, it's all Lisa Brown. So I was like, this is pretty great. That was pretty good. So I do commend her on being able to do most of the voices, but unfortunately Phil's voice, the gardener, it was too much. So like I said earlier, we're kind of placed immediately in the plot. There's really not a whole bunch of backstory. That's trickled throughout the story. There's a slow burn that comes up to the climax. So something that I felt that maybe should have been flushed out a little bit further is that from the climax to the end of the book was super fast, and I felt like it was a little rushed. And especially considering just how much back-ish story we had or plot coming up to this climax, there were a few things that I was like, I didn't really feel like had a good reason for it, or it just wasn't explained well enough for me to be like, oh, that is just very cool and awesome. Like, it had so much potential. And I'm not going to ruin the end for you, but as you approach or get to that climax, I bet you'll know exactly what I'm talking about, because there's certain facets of the story where you know exactly what's happening. I knew most of the plot the very, very beginning. I just knew exactly what it was presented to us just on a silver platter, in my opinion. No problem with that. But then there was additional stuff there that I was like, what? And I think it needed more an explanation for it. So, those are things that, here's what I'll say, is the stuff that is about Grandma May's father, that all needs it just needed a little bit more. That was kind of just, oh, by the way, here's X and Y, and here's the cause and effect, and there it is. That's it. So that was kind of like, that threw me off. As far as like a haunted house-ish story, I thought this was a pretty unique, awesome Southern Gothic story. It was fun. I love our protagonist. So Sam is a fun protagonist to read. She's just loud, vibrant, full of just this amazing knowledge. She's very, very much herself and with no shame. And I absolutely love it. I love how geeky she is. She loves bugs. And it was really awesome to see a character like that. And many authors, this is another thing I really like about Ursula Vernon, is she usually has these very amazing, distinct characters with just bright personalities, just shining, and you're like, wow, they all have no shame. Even the ones where they're just like really timid, they still are very much, themselves as a character. I just see a lot of authors create these very bland characters, and I know there's a place for this where people can put themselves as the main protagonist, and I think there's a place for that. This book, I loved Sam. She was fun to read. The relationship between Sam and her mom, I think, really speaks through this novel. It's quite beautiful. It's a relationship that I want to cultivate with my relatives as well. It's really fun. The fact that mom and daughter can truly be themselves with each other without hiding different facets of themselves is it's brilliant. I love that. Because Sam is such a approachable protagonist and she's hilarious, like laugh out loud. There are lines in there where I was giggling and it was so much fun. I felt like it kind of broke some of that fear factor for me. I just didn't really feel that scared. And that's because Sam approaches a lot of these things and events that are happening with more of a scientific brain, and she's like, this is not, this isn't real. And the way she rationalizes a lot of things kind of, to me, deflates any of that scary, spine-tingling feeling you'll get, because I really related with Sam. That's how I feel like I would approach the situation that she was in as well. So that was really fun. But if you are looking for something that's just strictly really serious, spooky story, this might not be for you because it's actually kind of fun. It's just like almost like a romp in the woods kind of book, but it's, it's a haunted house. There you go. So again, overall, I do give this book about a 3.5. It was enjoyable. I read it really fast. Even though it was a slow burn, it still had just a really great character, fun dynamics, and the story, even though it was kind of predictable in some ways, it was still pretty entertaining and a little unique. I really love Ursula Vernon's way of getting into more of nature horror. I think it's fun, but bringing in some of that paranormal aspects to it is excellent. So I do recommend this book if you are looking for a springtime/summertime read right now or within this year. Definitely pick up A House with Good Bones by T. Kingfisher. Don't forget to subscribe or follow on your favorite listening app or here on YouTube. You'll be notified anytime we go live or anytime we upload a new video/podcast episode. We do it often, and most of the time we'll publish at least Wednesday and Friday. Join us on our socials at Dark Side of the Library on Instagram, Facebook, and our YouTube channel if you are on our podcast. And you can find us on amazonlive.com/live/Dark Side of the Library. Thank you so much for watching/listening if you are on either or of these platforms, and have a creep-tastic rest of your week.